diese Einführung. Ja, herzlich willkommen. Das ist der letzte Vortrag. Oh, changing to English, I'm sorry. This is the last presentation between lunch and you. So I know you are looking for lunch, but I try to make it comprehensive and understandable so that you then, if you're a little bit exhausted right now, can listen to it well. Yes, you were very right, Dr. Miller, thank you for the introduction. I'm now going to the big frame, and actually the ideas behind it's now 1.4 tera hours in geothermal in Germany, and it is supposed to be 10 terabyte hours in 2030. There's a big leap, and the question is, how do we get there? And I try to explore a little bit how ONG, that means oil and gas, can help us there, but also to somehow explain the difficulties. So, what will I do? The answer actually to the question, why should big oil and gas go geothermal, is because the business model of ONG has gotten risky, and geothermal is best fit to attract ONG and to eliminate these risks. This sounds very abstract, and the content right now is to explain what I mean by this. So what are the risks of ONG? They are so giant and they made extremely good profits last year, so why do I speak about risks? Why is ONG still attractive despite of these risks? I will explore. Proper risk assessment gives natural risk priority over politics. This I will explore more. What does the German government do? Then I will tell a little bit the pioneers, show the success of geothermal, and if ONG change to geothermal, they offer 3 benefits for other stakeholders. And then I come to the conclusion. So let's start with the risks. The outset. 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from energy sector, and 90% of those are from fossil fuels. So this is a very, very broad picture. In 2021, global CO2 emissions reached 37 billion metric tons. To reach the target of staying below 1.3 degrees Celsius, we need to reduce the CO2 emissions by 2030 to 16 billion metric tons. So there is a difference of 21 billion metric tons, and this is a risk that makes our planet almost inhabitable if we don't do more than we do. It sounds very abstract. I will give you a much more interesting image on that, a picture on that. It's actually predicted if the increase of temperature is between 3 and 4%, then it's McKinsey, it's not an NGO. They say in 2099, so it's in 75 or 76 years, when my daughter still will be alive, then only 10% of this planet are inhabitable. So this is Canada, it's Europe, actually probably Offenburg is still inhabitable, but then it's Russia and Greenland, and a little bit Patagonia and a little bit New Zealand. But the rest, talk about China and United States, is not inhabitable anymore. This is a projection by McKinsey, so it's not just anything, just to have in mind the risk that is behind this. So having this in mind, we are talking about the risks. Because of the climate-friendly policies, the demand of oil and gas will possibly dramatically fall in 2030s. I explore a little bit later on the time frame. And the quicker ONG leave fossil fuels for renewable energy sources, e.g. geothermal, the lesser are these risks. So this is the thesis behind it. And if you see from the graph, it's really only starting from 1950 that the emissions were increasing so dramatically that they are beyond than 16 billion metric tons per year. And this is endangering right now. We have to pull this down, and there ONG is a big problem, but it also can be a big solution. So this is the thesis behind my presentation. So, why can geothermal attract ONG? So about 70%, you can vary on that, of the work of geothermal exploration is similar to ONG. The geology is similar, the drilling, equipment for drilling, seismic, chemical aspects, mapping and resource allocation. There is a difference. Heat exchange, power production and energy distribution is not normally done by ONG, but it's very similarly to the two industries. But why then, if it's so easy for ONG to change to geothermal, why are they still doing then ONG? Well, there's a profitability, but not as big as it's normally understood. So it's about the average, the global average, about 4%. So it's not that big a reason to stay with oil and gas. But for 50 years, there's been an average profit per day on $2.6 billion US. So it's the scale that makes this industry so interesting. So it's AP Møller from Denmark is rather an exception. They completely left ONG and they went to only do geothermal. So there are some front runners who realized those risks and they changed completely. But the major industry, as you know, don't do this so far. To the opposite, up to $536 billion US per annum globally will be spent on new fossil fuels plants. That means not the old explorations, but there are plans on this amount of money, so we are talking really big money, will be spent. And this is really then endangering the climate goals I have been showing earlier with the possible consequences. But this will, of course, not just happen like this. It will provoke strong countermeasures by national government and probably in the 2030s if climate changes dramatically. Also, already now, oil and gas can experience project financing is getting a little bit more difficult, and also social license, so social acceptance, might challenge the development of new fields. But why then do companies still invest in ONG despite these climate risks? Well, the answers are maybe surprising. Big companies tend to be self-destructive if there are disruptive changes. So the very, very well-known example is Kodak. Kodak having been the most, the by far biggest company on photography. They even developed in the 90s the digital camera, but they wouldn't think this is going to be the new model. So, but then in 2005, they still had a turnover of $12 billion US per year, but 7 years later they were bankrupt, because then iPhone was invented, and so nobody wanted to buy this anymore. So even though they knew there's a new technology, they didn't change. They tried to stay with their old industry. And this is maybe also a problem, this difficult idea to move, or the difficulty of big companies to move, to stay with the old concept. Another example is the German car industry. There is clear frameworks by the politics to reduce the production of cars towards electric cars, or to less emissioning cars. But the German car industry alone spent 50 billion euros on fines, compensation, and all other costs before they changed. And Volkswagen, for example, alone did 30 billion, you're talking about this. So they lost this amount of money out of the profit. Instead of investing in a new industry, the electric car, they rather preferred to infringe the law. So that happens. I'm not saying there is no rationale to stay with oil and gas. There is, of course, there are reasons, but maybe not to invest anew. So I call this sleepwalking, what these companies like Kodak and Volkswagen did, and there are many more examples actually. The question is ONG sleepwalking? No, it's not. ONG is transforming in phases the risk of climate change. But ONG in Germany successfully lobbied for hydrogen as the backbone of the energy transformation, even though, sorry, I have to add, green hydrogen wastes 60% of power and is not sufficiently available. So everybody knows who is more in these figures that hydrogen will not be the backbone, but still it's lobbied like this. So if you're in Berlin on one of these transformation seminaries or congress, it's only hydrogen. Nobody talks about geothermal. This is very surprising, but this is a fact. And this is, I think, the lobbying, the very good lobbying of OMG. Why do they do it? Because hydrogen can also be produced by gas, so they save this. And then once the bubble collapses, and it will collapse, even right now the heating companies say it's not possible to only rely on hydrogen. Then the bubble collapses, and what has the government to do? They have to return to oil and gas. So that's the logic beside it. And there's this geothermal would be a solution. But it is not talked about it because there can be a better lobbying of geothermal than the OMG does with hydrogen. So the question is, this is a measure to do this for some years. But is it quick enough if OMG changes its policy in the framework of risk management? Well, we will remain so far from reaching the 1.5 degree. So to show this, this is, here we are right now. This is the Corona 5% gap. And this is what we are going to be. This is 2.4 degrees if we do the current trajectory. If we accelerate, we will be landing here. But this is 1.9 degrees in 2050, and it's not the 1.4. And if we want to get to this, we have to be much quicker until 2030 to be able then to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius. But does it really matter that we have 1.5 or 2 degrees if we are outside? We never will be realizing this. Yes, it does matter. Here's one example of the different consequences. It's all projection, so it's not fact, but it's projection. But we already feel right now that that climate change has its effect. And here is the column what happens if 1.5 Celsius degrees are reached. So we have a hard time to go there until 2030. You can see this. This is probably the most dramatic thing, the ice-free summers in the Arctic with all the consequences. And if it's 2 degrees, so more or less all the climate experts are pretty certain that every 0.5 degree in addition above 1.5 is quite detrimental. And how much do we have? As you know, the UN institution is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Here, this one. They say we only have 6.5 years left, so until 2030. And then projection there is the risk that latest then in 2030, when the 1.5 degree is reached instead of in 2050, and the climate risk then might accumulate, and then climate damage are unpredictable. So this is not an NGO, it's the IPCC, so it's the UN government where all countries do agree, and it's also articles on that which I cite here, which are signed by Schellenhuber and all these experts we have in Germany. So it's not just fantasy. Possible government measures, once the governments realize it doesn't work to go to the 1.5 degrees until 2050. As we have seen in the pandemic, there is a strong governments can react very strongly. So it might be the expert that we have seen, like Vila and Drosten, we haven't even known before the pandemic. Suddenly, climate expert will explain us how to stop floods and other natural disasters. That might be in the 30s, so that might be within the next 10 years. And then government will follow those advices, and this can be very strong reactions against CO2 emission and then strong reactions against the ONG industry. There's one example which is little known, but in the Second World War, President Roosevelt from the United States ordered no car production anymore, only military equipment. So a whole industry, which seemed to be existential, was then changed into military. So it can work if the disaster is big enough. So right now, many industry, and I suppose also ONG is to some extent there, prefer to ignore scientific prediction on natural disasters in the 2030s and prefer to ignore these risks and believe in the political framework. So right now the companies they say, well, the political prediction is we can work and it will not be impeded until 2000, whatever, in Poland is 2045, we can go on with coal and so on. Yes, there is a political prediction, but in the end it's not the politics who decide how the situation will be, because nature and its interpretation set the ultimate frame, not the politics. So I'll give you 3 examples. The Polish government wanted to eliminate the wind industry when it came to power in 2015. And they increased the tax by 4 times, so no wind industry, and it was a 10 billion business, was making profits anymore. But after 2 years, they realized it's not working. First of all, the citizens didn't like the dust, so all had, before the pandemic, had these masks and were really angry about it. And then especially the coal industry, for whom the Polish government wanted to work, because they wanted to prefer the coal over wind, because they thought coal is Polish and wind is foreign. It's a little bit strange perception, but it was the case. And they realized the coal industry decreased in their market value dramatically because nobody wanted to invest in them anymore. So after 2 years, in 2018, then the Polish government changed its policy. There are 2 other court decisions. The one in Germany 2 years ago, when the Constitutional Court here in Karlsruhe said the government has to work in accordance to the predictions of the scientists in order not to endanger upcoming generation. The German government, by law, is obliged to go not with the existing framework, but with the framework that is given by nature and its scientific interpretation. The same judgment, or a similar judgment, was given in the Netherlands in 2012 against Shell when indemnification were at stake. So, what does the German government do? The outset, I think this is being a German citizen myself, the press doesn't say this too much. We are the 6th worst polluter of CO2 in the world. Starting with China, 28, then the United States, 15, India, Russia, Japan, but then it's Germany. And Germany is within Europe. Europe is yellow. It's by far the most polluted. It's because of heat, and there again, geothermal is the solution. And actually, if you compare, if you think China is dirty, China has 14 times as many inhabitants as we have. So if you multiply 2 by 14, you end up at 28. And it's exactly, China per capita is as dirty as Germany. And actually also China has, as we have, about 50% of renewable in power production. So the outsets are similar, even though we perceive ourselves as being very clean. This is the outset. And the German government did a lot, but I will, of course, confine myself to the cornerstone paper of November 2022 on geothermal energy. So a lot of the propositions by the German Geothermal Association, BVG, were considered it's not law, it's just a cornerstone paper, so accelerating the geothermal procedures, allowing open access to geological and geothermal data, state guarantee for exploration risk, subsidies, and so on, in order to reduce CO2 emissions in Germany. But this strategy aims at minimizing the 2% that Germany emits in global standards on CO2. I think there is a better solution, and now I come back to OMG and geothermal. Sorry for writing so long. So if we here in Germany establish a market design to stop new investment in OMG, transfer investment from OMG to geothermal in order to reduce not the 2% but the 70% that OMG on a global scale emits, then this is much more effective. I'm not saying that Germany alone can do it, but Germany can do the design for that. And if this design works, it can be adapted. And then the design going from OMG to geothermal and other things, of course. Then this is the big change and not the change of only reducing the output in CO2 emissions within Germany. And there are a lot of advantages actually if OMG changes to geothermal. Big OMG does not like so much subsidies, so it saves a lot of money for the government. And as we will see in the afternoon, actually, when we have the session of the 4 front runners we have tonight here, today here, it's very, very interesting. They can do big geothermal projects without subsidies, and they want to do it without subsidies because oil and gas hate subsidies because it somehow limits and infringes themselves. So, instead of subsidies, this is also referring to the US Inflation Reduction Act, one could think about a tax holiday. And tax holidays for the OMG that come from OMG to renewable energy sources investment. The advantage is the leverage, as I said, it's not only 2%, but to 70%, so the leverage would be 35 times, if also adopted by other countries, of course. It's not Germany that saves the world here. With this, the German government can also approach OMG and actively discuss with them whether they would not change into geothermal. All investment risks stay with OMG because it's not subsidies that are given that are risky, because subsidies can fail the project and then subsidies are gone. If OMG does not get subsidies but only tax holidays, they have to invest, they take this risk, they even have to take the risk of profitability, and only as a golden handshake at the very end, they get a tax holiday. And then, in this way, tax holidays can be cheaper than subsidies. There is a lot to say about this, of course. So that would be a suggestion I'm doing here, is think of what the US did with the Inflation Reduction Act, adopted to a level for OMG, for big investment, that they don't get subsidies but tax holidays, whereas the smaller or more complicated projects, of course, they need subsidies. And then, but this would be then a different layer, they would not be subject to tax holidays. Well, now I come to the brighter side of my presentation. We have actually 4 pioneers. NRG is one. We will hear Alex Richter after lunch. We have EVER. We will hear Robert Winslow after lunch. And we have Worldcom Energies, and we will hear Horst Kreuter after lunch. They are all front-runner on a European, if not a global scale. So it's very interesting, and they can promote this change. Actually, and I forgot to mention Rystad Energies, Henning Björk, he will also talk. They do also data on oil and gas for 20 years, and for the last 4 years, the data for geothermal on a global scale. So in this respect, they are the first, the front runner in analytics. If OMG change to geothermal, they offer at least 3 benefits for other stakeholders. And I just like to very shortly hit on that. as I said earlier, energy production industry gets from ONG the capital. So they have these $500 billion per year in the state. They could use this to invest. They have the geological know-how, they have the drilling experience, and sometimes here in Germany, cities try to do it, or utilities, and they always have the first shot, and once this is done, they have experience, and probably they make mistakes. Whereas oil and gas industry, they have this experience, so they have very, very valuable knowledge and money and assets to contribute to this transformation. Also, the communities and cities can have advantages because big oil and gas can at least work on a contracting base. That means that cities and utilities in the sense of district heat network operators, they don't have to pay for it, but just have to see that the investment will work, and then they just pay a certain price on the energy they have to do. And this is a different approach that oil and gas can provide, and it's a little bit difficult to do this as a city utility. Control is normally given back once the investment is paid off. Oil and gas doesn't like to operate, they like to drill. So normally the idea of the city then being dependent on these giants is not the idea of ONG. They like to, after they are paid, to then return their assets. And then all cities, of course, because geothermal energy production does likely not pollute the climate anymore as ONG traditionally does. So, I come to the conclusions of the risk assessment. If big oil and gas integrate the timescale of the climate risk, it is likely that their traditional business model will not allow new ONG plans and investment. Strong measures of national governments against ONC emissions in the 2030s are likely if climate disasters occur. Geothermal is the best way to reduce these risks. The German government has the chance to create a market design not only to reduce the CO2 emissions in Germany, 2% of global emissions, but also to create the market design to attract big oil and gas to invest into geothermal, thus facilitating a reduction of 70% of global CO2 emissions of the energy sector. Last point, seeing is believing. Go to Iceland and Denmark and see how energy transformation works while people are happy. So Iceland, whoever has been there, I suppose a lot of you have been there, it's 100% renewable energy sources in heat and power, not in traffic. It was one of the poorest countries in Europe 120 years ago, and now it's one of the richest countries in the world because they managed this energy transformation. There's a lot to say about this. The Icelanders are constantly among the five happiest people on this planet in the global happiness register. And there are reasons for that. Whoever has been to Iceland, I think, can tell the story much more in detail. Denmark is even more impressive. Denmark decided in 2020 to leave huge ONG fields unexplored in the sea and count now on the technical solution for the energy transformation. Denmark has the world market leader in wind, this is the firm Vestas, has with Copenhagen the world capital of bikes, so it's 5 times more bikes than there are cars, and it's most innovative in heat with energy in geothermal, energy being a part of the AP Møller group. The Danish are also constantly among the 5 happiest people on this planet in the Global Happiness Index. So probably it makes a difference, it makes people happy if they don't constantly infringe against the nature, but have a perspective on how to operate their energy in accordance with the natural demands. Are there Icelandic Danish transformation model for the rest of the world? I leave this question open, and there's a lot, of course, more to say. I just want to give you a very general structure on these thoughts and how to attract ONG to geothermal, and I'm now happy to receive questions. Thank you very much.